My little girl wanted me to stop being her mom so her actual mother, who was wealthy, could legally become her parent. Several years down the road, she reappeared because she required my financial assistance and she felt like I was obligated to give it to her. I'm truly grateful that my daughter, Tara, and her stepmother, Danny, have a wonderful connection. I should probably provide some background information. My marriage to Mark wasn't very good. We fell in love early in life and got married because we believed it was the appropriate thing to do after I discovered I was pregnant with Tara. Though Mark made an effort to be a decent father, he was exceptionally unmotivated. He never gave Tara any assistance whatsoever. I was the one who did the feeding, diaper changes, the sleepless nights until she could sleep, bathing her and going on walks. Mark was the fun parent who would come home and spend about an hour with the baby while I prepared dinner or tidied up the kitchen. Following that, he'd eat and retreat to his office to play video games. Whenever I asked him to lend a hand around the house or with Tara, he'd tell me that those tasks were for women, claiming it was God's plan. This created constant conflict between us, and I would plead with him for help because I was completely worn out. He always declined. One time I was so unwell I couldn't move. I pleaded with him to look after Tara so I could rest, but he began a fight, calling me lazy and saying his mother never asked his father for help. That truly enraged me since Tara was his daughter too. Even so, he did absolutely nothing to assist. I shouted that I would leave if he didn't start taking responsibility. That seemed to give him a jolt, and he reluctantly consented to watch over Tara, which allowed me a few hours to rest. After my maternity leave was over, I inquired if my mother would look after Tara while I worked, and she was thrilled to do so. Mark's mother didn't even offer her assistance, but that was all right with me. Mark wasn't pleased that I was returning to my job. He always wanted me to stay at home with our daughter, but I declined. Thinking back, I'm so grateful I didn't quit my job, since not long after, Mark was let go when his company reduced its staff. It was a real surprise for both of us. When he shared the news, I felt like panicking as well because we needed the money for all our expenses and Tara's care. But I realized if I freaked out, he'd just become even more worried. So I attempted to comfort him. To begin with, I proposed he help care for Tara while looking for work. Mark wasn't enthusiastic about the suggestion, however. He finally agreed. Each day I'd come back, I would arrive at the house only to see him in the same place on the sofa, lost in video games, with Tara playing close by on the ground. He disregarded fundamental duties such as feeding or bathing her, and frequently I found her hungry and unkempt when I returned. I was so angry because I had no choice but to work hard to support us while feeling awful that Tara was being ignored. During this period, we argued more, with Mark saying he was trying to find a job but never going to any job interviews. Several months later, Mark said he wanted to enroll in a business course. The man I was with had always been talking about launching his own company, and to be honest, I thought it was a terrible time. My hope was that he would prioritize securing a reliable job first. Nevertheless, he'd apparently talked it over with his parents, who were going to cover his education costs. It felt like I was the last one to be informed, as if my viewpoint wasn't valued. In retrospect, I should have just left the relationship then, but I didn't. While he was back in school, I worked and took care of our daughter, Tara. Eventually, he finished school, built his own business, and things were going well. He even employed people to assist him. That's how Danny came into our lives. Danny was a young, enthusiastic woman who had just graduated and was hired to be his assistant. Mark and Danny were often together, spending lots of time together, but I didn't think much of it. The thought of him being unfaithful didn't even cross my mind. Even so, Mark began introducing Danny to our daughter, Tara. Every time he brought Tara to the office, he made sure they spent time together. It made me uneasy, so I directly asked him if there was something between them. He claimed I was reading too much into it, denying it all. I let it go until, out of the blue, a friend phoned me and said she'd seen Mark at a coffee shop holding hands with a woman. She didn't know who Danny was, but from what she described, I knew it had to be her. I felt incredibly ashamed. Not only was my husband being unfaithful, but I knew the news would spread quickly. That night, I told Mark that he should invite Danny to dinner. I told him I thought I should finally meet her since she worked for him. Little did he know I already had proof of what was happening between them. At the dinner table, I flat out told them I was sick of the secrecy and that I was aware of their actions. Mark looked stunned and Danny's face lost all color. I said I didn't even care if they were having an affair because honestly nothing could salvage our relationship now. I gave a harsh laugh as he kept trying to pin the blame on me, claiming I hadn't made enough effort to make him content. He insisted I was too absorbed in my own life and independence. I sighed and brought up how my work provided for us when he was out of a job and again when he was in school. Mark insisted I should have quit my career when his business started succeeding, but I pointed out that I couldn't take that chance. We both needed to work to ensure we were financially stable. It infuriated me that he was trying to create reasons for our divorce. I told him I had never disregarded either him or Tara and had always managed the house while holding down a job. He had no right to place the blame on me. He persisted, but I simply tuned him out. I looked at Danny, wished her well, and got up from the table. Right then, I knew precisely what I had to do. Oddly, Mark seemed to relax, as if he was happy he no longer needed a reason for a divorce. I had once loved him, no doubt, but since Tara arrived, we had just become people sharing a space. I was handling the majority of the chores, so leaving him wouldn't really be a loss. I began packing my belongings along with Tara's, while Mark kept asking me what I was doing. I told him I was leaving and that he'd be getting divorce papers soon. He attempted to reason with me, claiming I was being unfeeling and that we ought to deliberate more, but I was finished analyzing everything. I was completely done. For the time being, I went to live with my folks. If you're curious whether his family ever got in touch to console me or give him a verbal dressing down for splitting us up, the answer is a resounding no. They never uttered a single thing. Later, I discovered the explanation. Dani wasn't just young, she hailed from an affluent background. Tying the knot with her would give Mark access to some of that cash. Frankly, I wasn't preoccupied with any of that. My sole objective was to make certain that Mark and I could peacefully co-parent for Tara's well-being. From my initial perception, Dani didn't seem like a negative individual, so I was optimistic she'd be a good stepmother to my daughter. Throughout the divorce proceedings, I took half of Mark's belongings, a considerable sum since his company was generating six figures. I purchased a home for Tara and myself. Mark and I had shared custody. I had Tara from Mondays to Fridays, while he had her from Friday afternoons until Monday mornings, transporting her to school. Shortly after our divorce was finalized, Dani promptly moved in with Mark. Tara would return and excitedly tell me about their outings to luxurious restaurants or amusement parks. She constantly anticipated the weekends with them. Initially, I didn't pick up on anything odd, but as time passed, Tara began to pull away from me. I was the kind of mom who insisted she complete her schoolwork and instructed her on basic responsibilities, such as washing dishes or folding her laundry, tasks she wasn't fond of. I also made sure she ate nutritious meals instead of giving in to her cravings for fast food daily. Mark and Dani, in contrast, were the fun-loving parents who allowed her to do pretty much anything she pleased on the weekends. They didn't make her do any housework, and she'd spend her time watching television or enjoying tasty treats. Tara frequently mentioned how much fun they were, and occasionally even expressed the desire to live with them permanently. It was painful for me to hear, but I reminded myself that she was just a kid and didn't dwell on it. When Tara turned 12, Dani became pregnant with twins. Tara was experiencing a lot of worry during this period and kept asking me if Mark would still care about her once the Bobbies arrived. I kept telling her she was secure. Her worrying became so intense that I had to talk to Mark about it. Mark eventually spoke to Tara, easing her worries by assuring her nothing between them would change. Nonetheless, Tara then expressed her desire to spend more time at his place, and he approved. She began going over to his house on Wednesday afternoons in addition to the weekends. Tara had her own bedroom in their house, but with the twins on their way, Mark told her he was going to turn the basement into her new room so that her old room could become the twins' nursery. Tara was okay with this plan. I didn't know any of this was going on because, by that point, my daughter didn't talk to me very much. She was so caught up in being part of Mark's family that she rarely shared any details about her life with me. After the twins arrived, Mark told me that for the following 2 months, Dani didn't want Tara coming over as she wanted to concentrate completely on the infants. I lost my temper, yelling at him that this would upset Tara and make her wonder if he even cared about her. Mark insisted that he needed to support Dani and put the twins first. When I broke the news to Tara, she burst into tears and kept asking why Dani didn't want her around anymore. I tried my best to soothe her. When Mark came to get her a month later, Tara was ecstatic. Later, she told me how incredibly cute the twins were and how nice her new room in the basement was. When I saw pictures of her room, I had to concede that it looked really nice, even though it hurt a little that she'd given up her old room so readily for the twins. Still, if my daughter was happy, that's all that mattered. With time, Tara came up with more and more excuses to stay at her dad's house for additional days. She told me how much she loved helping care for the twins, especially since Dani sometimes needed a rest. This made me furious. I told Mark to stop using our daughter as a babysitter. He countered that it was a chance for Tara to connect with her siblings. I retorted, saying his kids could bond with Tara without her having to change diapers or give them bottles. That wasn't a suitable task for a teenager. After some tense talks, he finally gave in. But then Tara exploded when she learned about it. Apparently, Dani had led her to believe I was the one who ratted on her. Tara started screaming at me, explaining that she wanted to support her with the twins. Nevertheless, I understood that my daughter was working overtime to belong and to win affection from Mark and Dani by just going along with whatever they wanted. I reminded her that this was the time for her to have fun as a teenager, not to be a constant caretaker, but Tara just brushed it off. It was the start of Tara always choosing Dani over me. Though I never had anything against Dani, it stung every time my own daughter compared me to her stepmother. Teenagers can be truly heartless, and Tara was no different. She became increasingly mean and disagreeable towards me. One example, I was relaxing on the sofa after a long workday, watching television and snacking, and Tara walked out of her room. She stared at me and said, "You're becoming a real pig these days." I was taken aback, mainly because I wasn't even heavy. When I asked her the reason behind it, Tara said that Danny had told her gluten causes weight gain and that they banned gluten from their house. I told Tara that even if gluten wasn't the best thing, it wasn't inherently terrible and she shouldn't be body shaming anyone. As things progressed, Tara transformed into a totally different person. In practically every discussion, she would bring up how Danny did this or that. It felt like she was trying to morph into a copy of her stepmother. She wouldn't go anywhere with me when the sun was shining, claiming she didn't want to get a tan. She also began to forego breakfast to shed some weight, hopping to squeeze into a bikini Danny gave her, which was a size smaller than what she needed. Tara would weigh herself every day, recording it in a notebook, and mentioned to me that Danny believed she could do beauty pageants if she kept up with her regimen. I was absolutely incensed when I found out about this. Before then, I'd never actually spoken to Danny, but I thought I should confront her. When I brought it up, Danny didn't think there was anything wrong with how Tara was acting. She told me that she'd only given Tara the beauty pageant idea and that she wasn't at fault if Tara took it too seriously. I explained to Danny that Tara looked up to her like a second mom, so she really needed to be more careful about what she said. Danny brushed me off, stating that I ought to encourage my daughter to reach her full potential rather than criticizing her. Those words shocked me, and I told her to keep her unusual beliefs to herself. Later on, Mark called me to yell at me because of how I spoke to his wife. When I described everything, he sided with Danny, maintaining that Tara shouldn't take Danny's advice so literally. I yelled back, insisting that he open his eyes because Tara was clearly being affected by Danny. But he didn't seem to care at all. I tried talking to Tara, encouraging her to just enjoy her teenage years and not be concerned about silly stuff like tanning or weight. However, she wouldn't talk to me and declined to have an open conversation about it. It was so evident that my daughter was growing more distant from me daily. She ceased including me in any choices she made. Like if there was a field trip at her school, she'd put off getting the permission slip signed until she saw Mark, even though I never had any problem with her going. It felt like I wasn't significant in her world anymore. I was nothing but an observer of her life, and it really hurt me deeply. I plunged into a really dark depression. During this tough period, I encountered Henry, who completely altered my outlook on things. He arrived in my life when I felt like things couldn't get any worse. Once Henry and I began dating, he noticed how much Tara's actions affected me. He kept telling me that all teenagers go through these stages of acting out, but honestly, things only got worse. Tara and I constantly argued, whether about her poor grades, her missing assignments, or just her general behavior. In the middle of these arguments, Tara would frequently say really awful things, like how she understood why Mark chose Danny over me. Every time I heard that, it shattered my heart. With time, I began to create an emotional distance between myself and Tara. When she turned 17 and was preparing to head off to college, Mark and Tara approached me to talk about something crucial. I figured it had something to do with college expenses and was prepared to tell Mark that I would pay half of it. But instead, Mark told me that Tara wanted me to give up my parental rights so Danny could adopt her. I was completely shocked. Tara explained that she'd been considering this decision for a long time and wanted Danny to formally become her mom. She told me she loved Danny more than she loved me and considered Danny to be her real mother. I was completely stunned, and at first I just figured this had to be a terrible nightmare. However, Tara begged me, explaining that she felt closer to Danny, looked up to her attributes and achievements, and wanted to be included in Danny's will as Danny's parents had pledged. As Tara was explaining all this, I fought to keep my feelings under control. I felt like everything was collapsing, like all my efforts were being wasted. The fact that my daughter didn't see me as her mother anymore was crushing. Even though I was hurting so much, I knew I had to think about what Tara wanted. I couldn't compel her to keep a relationship that she didn't want, and I couldn't keep her from trying to find her own happiness. My parents tried to get in touch with Tara, but she wouldn't answer their calls. During those next few days, I was overcome by a huge range of emotions. I grieved the connection I'd lost with Tara, missing the daughter I used to know. But through the sadness, I also felt a sense of quiet acceptance, figuring out how to live with things I couldn't change. Henry was with me the whole time. I was constantly crying to him, and even he thought Tara was being unbelievably hurtful. With a lot of sadness, I finally gave in to Tara's request, understanding that it was the conclusion of something important in both of our lives. The divorce proceedings dragged on for a bit. Eventually, Tara and I were legally separated, and Danny was going ahead with the adoption. After that, Tara hardly spoke to me anymore. The anguish from that time is something I can't even begin to explain. My whole existence had been centered on my daughter, and watching her leave me felt like more than I could handle. Henry was my anchor through it all, pushing me to go to therapy and even moving in with me to look after me. I gave up my job around then, and Henry took over all the financial burdens. They told me I had depression, and I began taking medicine. Thanks to Henry's endless support, I started to find a reason to keep moving forward. Gradually, I started to heal and stopped blaming myself for everything. Henry suggested I get involved in his business just to occupy my time, and I said yes. He was the partner I had always longed for but never had. I dove into my work and our relationship, discovering happiness in the little everyday things. Throughout the past 6 years, Henry and I worked as a team to expand his company. He made me an equal and gave me a place in the decision-making. We held each other in high regard in our professional and personal lives. We got married and made a good life for ourselves. I never could have predicted that Tara, who hadn't spoken to me in all these years, would suddenly get in touch. She called me yesterday out of the blue. Her unanticipated phone call blindsided me, kicking up a storm of feelings I thought I had left behind. She inquired about how I was doing and filled me in on what was going on in her world. It was a mystery as to why she had reached out, yet I was thrilled that she kept me in her memory after so long. In the final analysis, regardless of what any official document declared, she was still my child and I would always care for her deeply, no matter how much pain she had caused me. I figured perhaps she'd grown and desired to start fresh, to have a better relationship with me. However, the conversation soon steered toward the subject of her wedding, which was coming up. I was stunned to discover that my baby girl was about to get married. I found it difficult to contain my feelings. Then Tara revealed the actual reason for her call. She wanted me to give her money for the wedding. She mentioned that Mark didn't have a lot of money to help out since his company had struggled during the pandemic and hadn't fully rebounded. Danny also hadn't offered much help with the wedding, claiming she needed to save up for the twins. Tara continued by mentioning she knew I was financially comfortable now that I was married to Henry and had been looking at my social media occasionally. She wanted me to cover the expenses for the wedding because, as she put it, "You owe me." My feelings of happiness and anticipation instantly changed to astonishment and incredulity. I couldn't believe what Tara was requesting. She was behaving as if she had a right to ask, as though she was entitled to this after all the things she had done. I gently informed her that while I was glad she desired to reconnect, I was not able to simply forget everything that had occurred. I recalled the time she'd asked me to sign away my rights so Danny could formally become her parent, claiming Danny was her true mom. Tara countered by saying I was still her birth mother, and that it wasn't right for me to be so wealthy while she struggled financially. She figured giving her a small sum of money for her wedding wouldn't make a dent in my finances. I made it very plain that while I hoped she'd have a joyful life, I couldn't just give her unlimited funds for her wedding. She became upset, used some harsh language, and placed the blame on me for not fighting hard enough for her in the past. It was like she was desperately looking for any reason to validate what she was doing. The discussion was unproductive, and she eventually ended the call abruptly, quite angry. Now I find myself constantly questioning whether I made the right decision in not helping her. After all, I certainly have the means to do so. Was I mistaken to turn her down? I never anticipated this post would attract so much interest. In just a few days, numerous unknown individuals have contacted me, saying I absolutely shouldn't cave in to my daughter's requests. Initially, when I wrote this, I felt really guilty because, at the end of the day, she is my child, but reading everyone's responses about how Tara is basically trying to take advantage of me has made me wonder about my own assessment of the situation. As a parent, it's so challenging to stop loving your child, even when they don't want you involved in their life anymore. Tara will always be my little girl, but I have to accept that she's now an adult. She's become a spoiled grown-up in my view. Since Mark and Danny haven't gotten in touch, I assume they're clueless about Tara asking me for cash. I've made up my mind that I won't be giving her any financial assistance, and I plan to talk everything over with Henry. I followed the advice of some of you and sent Tara a message. This is what I typed. Dear Tara, I wanted to let you know I'm grateful to you. Thanks for reaching out and sharing the news about your life. It was really nice hearing from you, and I'm happy to know you're doing all right. About your request for money to help pay for your wedding, I want to be clear about where I stand. Even though I get that you'd like some help during this significant time, I have to say no to your request. Considering you decided not to have me in your life, I figure it's better to keep the space between us as it is. It's essential that I put my own health and my personal limits first. I'm wishing you all the best as you start this new part of your life, and I hope you can grasp and respect where I'm coming from. I hit send this morning, and if she replies, I'll let everyone know here. Tara did read my message, as it turned out, but ignored me. I think most of you were correct. It seems she wasn't really interested and simply wanted my money, no questions asked. Henry was not pleased with how Tara behaved toward me and advised that I block her to prevent future, unfair requests. I wasn't sure at first, but now I've decided to do it. Though Henry and I don't have children of our own, he does have nieces and nephews, so it's likely they'll inherit all we own. I'm incredibly appreciative of the assistance and guidance I've gained from the Reddit users. From now on, I intend to prioritize my own health and happiness while appreciating the loving bond I share with my husband. Update 4. I finally heard back from her, and it wasn't the news I had hoped for. I hadn't blocked her yet because I was still considering it. I had been courteous and respectful in my message, but she clearly hadn't learned any lessons from me. Basically, she whined that because I hadn't been there for her in the past and wasn't a good mother before, the very least I could do now was cover her wedding costs. She told me that if I didn't, she wouldn't send me an invitation. Tara also brought up that her fiancé's family was paying for some things, like the honeymoon and other things, but she truly needed my money for her portion of expenses. The worst aspect of it all, she told me why Danny didn't want to contribute. Danny, it seemed, told her the money was set aside for her twins since he considered Tara a stepdaughter, and this was not something he needed to do. That caused a disagreement between Tara and Danny, as well as with her father. Unsurprisingly, Mark supported Danny, not Tara. I thought about sending a response, however, in the end, I determined it would be better to leave the situation alone and let her be. I felt like she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. Final update, you know what? I couldn't just let this go. That evening, as I was in bed, my mind replaying everything, recollections of our history surfaced, remembering how Tara acted toward me during the period I was her mother and how she compensated me for all I did. Consequently, I determined I would, after all, respond. I communicated to her that, as her birth mother, I was going to provide her with a final lesson, one she'd dislike, yet something her trendy, wealthy mother obviously failed to instill. Initially, I highlighted how unappreciative she'd become, favoring her stepmother instead of me because of her perceived coolness. I brought to her attention how I tried to instill discipline and solid morals in her, only for her to resent me more and more for it. I also told her how deeply she hurt me by disowning me as her mother, and that I wouldn't be rushing back to her simply because she needed financial help. I indicated I wasn't interested in going to her wedding because I hadn't seen her in years and didn't even know her future husband. In truth, the only things that would interest me at the wedding would be the food, beverages, and celebration, not the pair. And on reflection, I quipped that everything would most likely be gluten-free and environmentally conscious, so even those aspects didn't sound fun. In conclusion, I informed her that because she had rejected me, I had also rejected her. I didn't need an ungrateful, self-centered child in my life. If she required money, she should go to Danny for assistance, and if Danny refused, well, that's entirely her problem. She gambled on the incorrect choice and lost. After sending that message, I felt a huge sense of relief. Certainly, I could have expressed even more. I really feel like I captured how I was feeling at that moment. After that, I cut off contact with her, not even waiting for a response. I also sent Mark a message, insisting he step up and take care of his daughter, making sure she didn't reach out to me again since I didn't want to hear from either of them, and then I blocked him as well. Perhaps some of you wished I would find a way to reconnect with my daughter or try to fix our relationship, but truly, after everything we've been through, I'm just not up for that kind of negativity in my life.